GrowCFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using GrowCFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net.
Hello and welcome to the GrowCFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and I've got one of my favourite returning guests with me today, Susana Serrano-Davey. Susana, how are you?
Hello, Kevin. Hello, everyone who might be listening. I'm very well, especially after your flattery. So I'm very honored to be here today.
I'm jealous because you'll be sitting in sunny Spain this morning, while here in the UK, it's wet and miserable out the window.
I know. I was in London last week and I always love the UK. I love England, but I agree the weather is not quite the same.
So why put up with a week in England when you'd be going drinking coffee and wine in sunny Porto-Banús?
I know. It's a hard life.
It is a hard life, Susana. But no, we're going to talk about a very interesting subject today. Something that you talk about in the new book that you're writing.
Indeed.
I believe in that book you're writing an entire chapter on personal brand.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about personal brand, Susana.
I'll tell you more. As you know, my book is all about confidence, and confidence is not something that we can seek. It's something that we find. But I think there are things we can do and areas we can explore that might get us closer to finding that inner confidence, which ultimately for me is the summary of I feel good about myself. Therefore, I am confident. And I think if we take time to think about personal brand, what does it mean? Am I in tune? Do I know what my personal brand is? Then we can get closer to that sense of feeling almost like that we belong. We are comfortable in our own skin. And that's why I think it is quite important to think about a topic that on the face of it might appear external and shallow, but actually if what we portray comes from within, then it's not shallow at all because it's our authentic self.
So personal brand is something that we've got to develop for ourselves. So where do you start?
More than develop, I'd say discover.
Right, discover.
I think something we often try and do in life and in the workplace is we put a mask on, we put a suit on, and we try and create a personal brand that aligns to what we think is expected from us. So, for instance, if we are a CFO or a senior leader in finance, we are supposed to look serious and be analytical and be all those things that are associated with the stereotypical finance person. And what I'm saying is that is all very good to understand what's expected from us. But actually what we need to do is go on a journey of self-discovery so we understand, do we really fit in with that mold? Is that who we really are? And if not, then not be afraid to also bring our real self to the workplace. So for instance, in my case, one of the things I discovered by going to the UK and then coming to Spain is that I am no longer from anywhere. When I went to the UK, I was labeled as a Spanish lady. Everybody knew me as a Spanish lady at work. And yet when I came back to Spain, I was the guiri, the foreigner, because even though I was Spanish, I was no longer the typical Spaniard. And therefore, that element of my foreignness, I now realize that has been a strong part of my personal brand and how I have been recognized and how somehow that exotic label could play to my advantage instead of to my disadvantage.
Okay, but there is an interesting thing there that people will put labels on you. Therefore, isn't there something about you having to manage the labels that are put on you so the right ones arrive there?
Yes, but I wouldn't like to focus this conversation around what we can force or manage or control. It's more about understanding what makes us really different and embracing that. Because if we embrace that, then there's nothing to control. It comes out naturally. People can tell. And therefore, they will pick up on the right label.
Okay.
rather than trying to think, no, I want to give an impression of X, and therefore I'm going to try and behave like this X. Now, for me, it's more about discovery. And more often than not, when I'm talking to people that I mentor, for example, they don't often allow themselves to come out in their natural selves because they're trying to fit into this mold. And I did that for a long time. But when you understand that, connecting with that thing that makes you unique and yourself, if you let that out to play, then we can be very noticeable. We can be very impactful because that is what really drives us. So I'll give you another example. I'm like a bullet. Kevin, I know you know me quite well by now, but I am a woman on a mission. If I want something to happen, I just get on with it and lots of things happen. And I never really stopped to think about this until one day, a few years ago, one of my line manager, my boss said, wow, Susana, you're like a bullet. Things just happened when you're involved. And I thought, actually, he's got a point. I am fast. I do make things happen. And that is part of my natural personal brand. And that's what other people, even if I don't try hard, they will perceive. So what I would encourage people listening to this podcast today is think, okay, all these things that I want to project are fine, but let's park that for a moment. Let's focus on what I can help but be and what I can help and project. Because I know you're very keen on the Strength Finder, the Clifton Strength Finder. And this is a bit the same. Focus on those things that are really strong in you and make sure that you convert them into your assets rather than your potentially hidden assets or liabilities.
Okay, so this is about understanding your own superpowers.
Absolutely.
Could be the 5 strengths that drop out of Clifton Strengths Finder. Could be other things that people say about you, like you're the bullet.
Yes.
Now, I get Clifton Strengths Finder. I can go get the book, get the code, go in, take the 50 or 60 question test, get the report, read all about it. But what about the brand things? What about the other things people say about you? How am I going to get those collected down on a nice piece of paper so I understand them?
So first of all, pay attention and listen. So if we break things down into manageable steps. So the first step in discovering our personal brand would be know yourself, as you are alluding to. So how do we go, apart from doing Clifton Strengths, how do we go about finding out what we stand out for? So first of all would be listen really carefully to what people tell you, because people who love you will tell you things. People at work will tell you things, and people around you will be telling you both the things you're very good at and that you shine at, but also the things that perhaps are holding you back. And if you listen to that, then you've got a really good starting point to reflect and think, okay, am I like this? And it's important as well to not only pay attention to what people say, but go on a search for perhaps things that you haven't yet allowed yourself to recognize or you haven't acknowledged as one of your core strengths. And for that, you can ask yourself, what am I really motivated by? What am I called to? What are the things I really enjoy? So for instance, I'm working with someone at the moment that she's brilliant at all the technical stuff in her finance role. But what she really likes is people. She loves engaging with the team. That's what she likes. And in my case, when I look back, I was a little bit the same. I was very good at a lot of the technical things, but what I was really happy doing was engaging with my team, managing people, talking to people, communicating. And guess what? That's what I do today for a living. So whilst there are things that people will tell you, there are also other things that you may have almost not paid attention to because that's not on the list of the obvious things to have in whatever role you are performing at the moment. So for me, the personal brand is not only about what job you have now, but who are you really as a person? What drives you? Because when we connect with that, if we're then able to be congruent in what we choose to do in life and how we act and we behave and we communicate, then there's a true sense of satisfaction there. And there's a true sense of being comfortable with who you are, which then leads us on to that confidence piece.
Absolutely. And I can see a lot of messages here that are echoing the conversation I had with Lucia Knight, who was talking about many people in the workplace being very dissatisfied with their role, with their job. And she teaches and coaches people how to get satisfaction out of what they do, how to bring out. And she talks a lot about superpowers and things that can really make a difference. So some very similar things, similar messages here, Susanna. But
Absolutely.
I'm thinking, okay, listen to what people are saying. And you say they'll be good and they'll be bad. Isn't there a kind of a human tendency to pick up on the negatives more than the positives and actually get yourself into a bad place because of that?
Yes, you're quite right. But if you neutralize it, I'm a fan of becoming as neutral as we can in terms of assessing a situation. So you pick any strength that you might think of or any weakness, those things that, as you said, we focus on. If you look at a scale, any attribute can be an asset or a liability. I can say this because we are talking amongst finance people. So but for those who are not finance, it can be something that it makes you stronger or something that makes you weaker. So if your tendency is to focus on the negative, then ask yourself, if this wasn't so exaggerated, where is the positive? What could be the positive interpretation or manifestation of this particular thing? So, for instance, I'll give you another example. I love change. I love exploring. And as you know, during a part of my career, I became an entrepreneur. I set up my own business and I did well. We had a fair amount of success, but I felt trapped like a canary in a cage. I just felt so trapped. But why is that? Because I'm a free spirit. And I love to be able to go full on into a project and give it my best and enjoy it and learn. And then once I've done that, I need to fly off. I need to do something else with my life. And therefore, for my personality type, for my personal brand, it's better for me to be doing things that I know when the time comes, I can walk away from, rather than build the business empire that it's all built around me. Does that make sense?
I get that one completely, having spent lots and lots of years as a management consultant and moving from client to client and project to project. Yes, I get into the position of feeling trapped when I've been in a situation too long and need to move on to the next challenge. Very much, yes.
So I think if we all understand what's our natural style, then we can make choices that are more aligned with what we need and therefore be happier. So one conversation I have with people sometimes is, where do I want my career to take me? Because perhaps becoming a CFO may not be the right answer for everyone. One thing is the carrot is dangled in front of all of this community at GrowCFO. This is what, in theory, everyone aims to achieve, but that's not right for everyone.
Actually, one of the first things I do in module 3 of the Future CFO program is take people through what I call the departure lounge exercise and say, okay, it's 3 years from now. You're in a departure lounge at an airport. You're going to some occasion, whatever that might be for you, and you've met somebody you haven't seen for a while, but reasonably well, and you go into that conversation of what's happening in your life. Now, take a piece of paper. Imagine yourself in that position in 3 years' time. What are you going to be telling that person? What sort of job have you got? What's happening family-wise? So on and so forth. And why are you in this airport? Where are you going? What's the event? Are you going because you're going to speak at a conference? Are you going because you're concluding a deal on buying a business or selling a business or a big fundraise or whatever it might be? Put yourself in that situation. Now, let's start planning our development plan once we've got some sort of vision of what we want. And that's going to be different for everybody.
It is. And I think actually that exercise is very tricky because most of us will approach it with our past experience, intentions, and expectation.
Yes.
We wouldn't necessarily dream big enough. So I'll give you another example because I think examples people connect with. When I set up my business many years ago now, the first thing I did, even before I had clients, this is funny, I sat down And I wrote what I called a welcome book for clients. And in that book, I wrote about what kind of practice, because this was an accountancy practice, what kind of practice we were going to be, what was important for us, what kind of clients we were aiming to look after, and a lot of information that I felt it was useful for them being expats, coming to operate in Spain, have a business in Spain. This came out of the blue, out of my inner intuition. I don't think this is something everyone who starts a business does. And guess what? So many years later, I'm now writing my second book. So can you see the link?
Oh, yes.
That's me at that point in my life to look at my personal brand or look at where I was going. I would never have said, I want to publish a book or I want to communicate things that I feel are important. So when we're doing that exercise of understanding our personal brand or your departure lounge, I do insist it's very important to try and just be wild. Even if there is something, there's a little seed in you that gets excited about certain things, or there are things you do purely out of intuition, then scratch behind that surface, because that's who you really are.
Yes.
Apart from everything else you have learned and you have conformed to.
Yeah, that's interesting. And one thing that I always say is, no, this is 3 years' time. It's not 5 years' time or more than that. Because as you say, you can't think broadly enough beyond that. When you set that business up, you could never think about being out of that business and writing a book. It's just not there. Things evolve. Picking up on an earlier point, Susanna, about this shiny object CFO job. Actually, in Module 9 of the CFO program, I go back to the same departure lounge exercise and remind people what they said. Because you'll get the headhunter on the phone that's offering you this first CFO job. And you think, oh, great, that's what all of this has been about. I must go take that. But is it the right CFO job? Is it the one that fits your aspirations, your skills, your needs, your superpowers? You don't just grab the first CFO job going along. I've seen too many people that have taken that first CFO job and less than 12 months down the road are looking for a new job because it hasn't been the right role.
I know. And I think we recorded a podcast some time back on preparing for interviews. And I think in that one, we did talk as well about assessing, is this the right move for me? Not only am I the right candidate for the company? So totally agree with you. And understanding your personal brand and what makes you happy and what you excel at is really important. And in fact, we see it now. I often mentor CFOs that are new to role. So I'm working with someone at the moment that when he was appointed as a CFO, he acknowledged that he had a lot of experience in M&A and other things, but perhaps on the process and finance transformation, he didn't have so much experience. So he thought, I better find myself a mentor. And that's how I'm supporting him. But he was aware of what are his strengths, what are the things he's got a lot of experience on. And I suppose now that he's on that job, on that role, it's going well and I'm supporting him, but it's a real struggle because the fit is not perfect. Yes, he's learning on the job, which I suppose we shouldn't really say either always shy away from the things that are outside of your best comfort zone. Of course, we're supposed to expand and explore, but we have to remain true, I think, to what's that flame that keeps us warm inside? What's that thing that makes us happy? And turn that into something that is visible. It's like, what do you call these? Un pavo real, this bird that has I can't think of the name now, with a tail that is colorful and has very long.
Peacock.
A peacock, that's the one. It's like a peacock. Peacock with the feathers put it away. You think, it's okay. There's nothing special about it. But when that peacock opens it up, wow, my goodness.
Okay. So that's taking us to another step, isn't it? We've talked about working out what this personal brand is, about knowing yourself. So how do we go into the next step and show that personal brand properly? How do we open our tail up?
I think we need to open the tail up by communicating our personal brand well. And so many of us are rubbish at that. I often would have a conversation with people when they're thinking of changing roles, and I say, okay, tell me, respond to that question, typical questions of the interview. Just tell me about you. Introduce yourself. It's amazing how many of us go into, and we do it at the GrowCFO sessions all the time when we have the preview sessions and you ask people to introduce themselves. And all they do is talk about the work that they do and what the company is doing. So what is the difference between Joe and Jack? There is no difference. So
No.
I think that second part has to do with communicating our personal brand well, so that we are reflecting who we are, not our next door colleague that does the same job that we do, but us. So who are you, Kevin? And what's different about Kevin from Susanna and from Dan and everybody else?
Yeah.
And to do that, we need to put effort. We need to stop, think about, okay, what are my key messages? How do I explain them also in a way that are backed up by evidence? So it's no good me saying, oh, I love writing, for instance. It's better to say, I love writing so much so that I've written a book. Can you see the difference? And again, so often when we're presenting ourselves, we hide behind these massive statements that are like wonderful words, but there's no substance.
Yeah, get that. And I guess that's why after that initial session where people introduce themselves, by the time we get to module 4 in that program, Andrew Waters is running an entire 2-hour session with the future CFO cohort on personal brand, because it is so important. In that particular context, you're after that first CFO role, how are you going to stand out as an individual that's worthy of this new CFO position? What makes you different from the crowd? And that's just one particular aspect of personal brand, which applies to all of us, no matter whether we're not yet a CFO or we've been a CFO for 20 years.
Absolutely. And it's important as well when you're communicating your personal brand, if you are being authentic, if you're being truthful, there is impact. It's impossible not to come across as credible because you're being authentic, being real. You're not just pretending to be the perfect candidate for the role, or even if and this expands to all sorts of situations in life, not when we are just looking for a job, but when we're engaging with clients, when we're meeting new colleagues, when we're even hoping to find a life partner. It's really important to just show that little brightness of who you are and why are you different. And that doesn't mean that we need to be perfect. It's perfectly okay. I'm a real disaster at this, but I manage it in such a way. So I think it's good as well to be balanced. It's no good just talking about our strengths, but also talking about the things that sometimes trip us up by acknowledging what it is we do to manage that. And I think that gets you a lot of trust as well from people.
Now, I just caught some words there that I wasn't expecting from you, Susanna.
Go
I'm
on.
a real disaster at this. So, first of all, why did you say that? And tell me a little bit more specifically, what do you do about it?
Well, for instance, it's funny. I think we all have two extremes in our personality. And I'm sure psychologists know way more than I do about this. So please don't quote me on it. But we all have almost like an inner face and an outer face. And our behaviors are extremely different. So some of us who might be like at work, I'm really extroverted, I'm full of energy, and I'm communicative, for instance. But yet when I'm home, I'm a lot more quiet and reflective and listen. And I think we all do that. Everyone can be really strong at certain things and have the other side. So in terms of being a disaster, which is what I'm trying to get to, is at work, I'm super organized. Even in the way I mentor, I have a method. If you read my books, you'll see there's a lot of methodology there because you have the steps. But that's my way of overcoming. My natural self is I'm just totally disorganized. If I didn't come up with these strategies, which is the methodology, I probably would live in chaos. And it's okay to recognize that. Or for instance, I have a virtual assistant that helps me with a number of things that I don't like doing, like sending invoices to clients, for instance. But she does that. I am very happy that I don't like dealing with that part of business with clients. So she does that. And I think acknowledging what you are good at, but also what you enjoy and what you're comfortable with is a real empowerment thing, because
Okay. Yep.
when you opt out of what doesn't fit in well with you, you can either get help or get training or find a methodology or whatever it is.
I like that. Yeah. So this is all about knowing yourself to start with,
Yes.
telling it properly.
Yes.
So you're showing people what your brand is. You're using those strengths, those superpowers whatever they may be, to your advantage, getting yourself in the right situations, the right roles, the right projects.
And prepare for it. I remember I went to the worst interview I've ever had in my life was many years ago. I went for this interview and I wasn't really sure whether I wanted the job. So I didn't spend any time thinking about it. And this meeting was an absolute disaster. I felt this lady that interviewed me, she was quite off-cut and aggressive and she didn't listen. So I walked away feeling quite aggrieved, thinking she didn't give me the chance. But now that I've had time to reflect and mature, I realized that I was as responsible as she was for such a terrible outcome.
Yep.
Because what did I expect? Just to go walk in there and out of inspiration, provide her a really good overview of who I am and what I'm about? Clearly not. So I do encourage everyone to just take time to reflect, think about it, and present yourself as you deserve.
Present yourself. Anything else we should know in presenting yourself?
There is one point that we haven't covered.
Okay.
So we know what we're about. We're able to communicate it properly. And this may sound a little bit controversial, but I think there is a third part that I feel is quite important. And the third step is dress for the occasion, which nowadays seems to be less and less important. And what I mean by that is we all make judgments. We all judge each other on the basis of how we look, because that's the way we're wired. But we also judge ourselves. So, Kevin, are there things in your wardrobe that when you put on those rainy days at home, if you look in the mirror, you think, oh, grey, just feel, you might be comfortable.
Yeah, there's a good point there. When I started working from home a lot, I'd just get up in the morning and I'd throw on whatever I'd normally throw on when I was just lounging about the house. It'd be a pair of jeans, a rugby shirt, something like that. And generally, I didn't feel good in the work situation. But I've now got into much more of a position of I'll put on a proper shirt, look the part at the desk, particularly if it's a day that involves podcasts, webinars, workshops, anything like that, of being on camera. And I think as a result that you get up in the morning and you dress to be the part, it lifts you up. It lifts you up a level.
Exactly. Because we also judge ourselves when we look in the mirror. If we don't like what we see, we feel dull and we feel deflated. And my point is that it's really important to look at yourself and think, oh, I quite like myself in this. I'm ready for that meeting because I have a nice shirt on. And I have felt the power of feeling empowered and feeling good in my own skin. And don't forget that for me, this is all about confidence via how I looked. And that doesn't mean it has to be high heels and a suit. It means it has to be something you feel good in that moment of your life. So for instance, now I might feel more comfortable wearing a light dress and something more informal. But if I'm doing a webinar or if I'm going to see a client in person, I will smarten up. And I think that is very important for your personal brand, especially for women and younger people. I remember in my audit days, when I was obviously a female and a lot younger than I am now, it was harder for me to get respect by the CEO of the client companies than it was for some of my male colleagues. And I think there is a sense in acknowledging that. And also when you are trying to build your career and be senior, inevitably, if you dress the part, others in the organization, subconsciously, they perceive you as someone that has a little bit more experience and more seniority. And therefore, in this modern world of startups and everybody going around in T-shirts and jeans and trainers, I do still think it's important to dress for the occasion because that will lift you up emotionally. And if you are feeling good about yourself, then wow, what a lovely impact to your personal brand that can have.
Which doesn't necessarily mean go and find the suit in the wardrobe that you haven't now worn for 5 years.
Exactly. Now, I'm not suggesting it needs to be formal, but it needs to be appropriate for the occasion. And more importantly, you need to feel good about it.
There's one person that stands out in my mind when I think about personal brand and dressing for the occasion. Somebody that Graham and I have interviewed several times on the Next 100 Days podcast. It's a chap called Big Ian Donnelly. And Big Ian He goes by Big Ian as very much part of his brand. He's very much into social care, and he's a musician, and he does loads of big charity events, and he's become quite a superstar on LinkedIn. But whenever you see Ian, he's always wearing a blue suit, and he's always a three-piece suit, so he's always got a waistcoat on, always wearing a white shirt, always a red tie, and that's Big Ian, however it turns up. So, of course, Graham and I, the last time we recorded a podcast with Ian, he'd just launched a book, and we were recording this during lockdown. So Ian turns up on screen, as you'd expect, in his three-piece suit. We do the whole podcast, Ian looking smart as ever. Then he gets up and reveals the truth and shows us what's on his bottom half. And he is actually sitting there in a pair of shorts and trainers.
Fair enough. But I think it is being distinctive is important. I remember when I first started to work for PwC many years ago, I went on a shopping trip with my husband and bought some new outfits for this job that I was so looking forward to. And one of the outfits I bought was a red suit. We even had the end of the shirt. My English is getting terrible, Kevin. I'm sorry. But anyway, it was like really flamenco-ish dress. And that dress was a total success at the office because everybody liked it. But also, it reinforced my foreignness and it was a bit of fun. So I don't think there is any harm in picking elements, whether that is your three-piece suit or it is clunky glasses or it is your hair, whatever makes you tick, whatever is comfortable for you, and just showing off those feathers, like we said with the peacock.
Yeah. So, Susanna, I think your English is like my golf. We get worse with practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's something about it goes further than dressing the part. You're almost stepping into a persona.
But one that inspires you.
The one that inspires you. So you've got to know yourself. And we are talking about what inspires you, what makes you tick, what makes you different. We're talking about using that to your advantage in the workplace, getting into the right places, the right roles, and so on. And we're very much in the dress the part. We're talking about almost stepping into that persona we've developed for ourselves. I like that, Susanna.
I'm glad you do. So I hope it's food for thought for everyone out there that wants to think about how do I make an impact?
And that's only one chapter out of your book on confidence. I'm looking forward when this book's finished, Susanna, to getting hold of a copy and reading it.
I know you will. Only a couple of chapters left and then I'll be done. And I'm thoroughly enjoying the process.
Yeah, and we'll have you back on the podcast when you launch the book.
I'll be here, faithfully ready.
Susanna, thank you for being this week's guest on the GrowCFO show.
My pleasure as always, Kevin. Thanks everyone as well for listening.
Brilliant, Susanna. Thank you.
You're welcome.